In this video, I want to talk about the various components that one uses to create a model with. So first I'll tell it that I want to make an insight, and then I'll tell it to clear this sample model that it gives me. So I want to talk about stocks, variables, flows, and links. A stock is meant to represent some quantity of stuff. It might be water in the bathtub, or water in the sink, or coffee in a cup, or water in a lake, or the amount of money that's in your bank account, or the number of butterflies in your wallet. It's really meant to be a stable or quantity of stuff that by itself just sits there. So for this instance, we'll call this stuff, and note that for every one of these elements there is a set of parameters that you can use to describe or define aspects of these elements when you create them. So here we'll call this stuff, and I'll put a note on it just saying this is a bunch of stuff that we're working with. And the idea being that if I put this note on there, once I mouse over it in the future, it will tell me it will show me a little eye, and if I click on it, I can see the note that's attached to the stuff. I can click the eye to get rid of it, or I can click the little X box. Annotating or documenting the models that you build is critical. I know you won't believe me, and everybody says, well, I'll do it later, and it never happens. You think you understand your model when you build it. If you go away and look at it 6 months later, I'll guarantee you that you won't remember all the things that you thought about it when you built it, and when you give it to other people, all they see is this wiring diagram without any comments to explain your thoughts behind the wiring diagram. So I encourage you, write comments in your models to help other people understand them. So I have this thing called stuff, and I'll tell it that there's initially 10 things in this piece of stuff, whatever it is. The little equal sign here tells me that I can click on it and get to the equation editor window. That's the evolved version of this little initial value place over here where I can type in a value. So I have 10 things in this box of stuff. Now, a stock is a thing that can only be changed by something that flows into it or flows out of it. No smoke and mirrors, no hand waving. It has to be explicitly altered by a flow of something. So to do that, we use a flow. So if I go ahead and create this flow and call it stuff out, and put a label on it saying this is the flow of stuff out of the box of stuff. So I now have stuff out. It has a comment on it, and I tell it that the stuff, a flow, has a rate. While a stock is simply a quantity of stuff, a flow has a rate to it. So it's an amount of something changing over time. So I'll say that the flow rate is 1. So it's one of the, whatever these things are in here, there's one of them leaving every time period. And now we'll go ahead and set up the time settings. I want this simulation to start at 0, and I want it to run for 10 time periods, and I want to call the time unit minutes, and I'm going to step the clock once every minute. So once I set this up, I can now go ahead and run it, and it should be apparent that after a period of 10 minutes, if I started with 10 of whatever these things were, and I took away one of them every minute over time, at the end of 10 minutes, I have none of them left because they all flowed out of the box of stuff. This is probably the simplest model that you can build that actually does something, even though what it does is probably about as interesting as watching paint dry. We will continue to move forward this and make them a bit more elaborate as time goes on, but some things that we can do to this to make it a little bit more. I mean, it's nice if the when people look at the models, they are somewhat engaging. So if I go here and I say box, I tell Google I want to search for a box, and I look at the images, and here's a box, and I can right click on this and copy the link address right out of Google. The problem is the address that you get is a funky Google reference to whoever it is. So if I right click on it and say, tell it to open this link in a new tab, it tells me where this image really is. So if I right click on it and copy the image URL, I can then go back to here, and down here in the display section of the stock variables, it says display image, which is none. There are a bunch of them built into the system that you can select from, or you can simply paste that URL into this point. So now I have a box of stuff. And now that I've pasted this image in there, you notice that it's a little bit difficult to read the label, so that all these options down here is I can change the label position and tell it to put it below the box itself. So I have a box of stuff, and stuff flows out of it over time. Now, at the moment, there's a constant rate at which the stuff flows out of the box. Suppose I took a variable and I call this how much, and I tell the variable that this is 0.25. Just, it's like 25%. So what I want to do is I want to use a link to connect the variable to stuff, and then change this so that rather than have a number in there, it actually references this variable. This variable is a constant or an equation that's computed in the midst of running the model, and use that to define the rate at which the stuff flows out. And it's defined to be 0.25, which is less than it was previously. So when I now run the model over the same time period, notice that it goes from 10 to 7.5 over the 10-minute period, and it also put the value of how much on the graph, because in the configuration section the default is add series when primitives are created. From this point, what I want to do is say that the rate at which the stuff flows out of the box is actually dependent on how much stuff is in the box. So I will use the link and tell it to connect here, and then just to make it look a little better, I'll hold the shift key and put a couple of handles on this link so I can move the link around. And now I will change the equation for stuff out to say that stuff out is actually the amount of stuff times how much. So it's the amount of stuff that's in the box times the value of how much that defines how rapidly it flows out. And if I now go ahead and run this simulation, you'll see that it initially begins, the stuff flows out more rapidly at the beginning, but as there becomes less and less stuff in the box, it slows out slower and slower. So this is just an example to show you the difference between a stock, which represents an amount of stuff, a flow, which causes what's in a stock to change either through an outflow or via an inflow so that you can have stuff that flows into a stock or flows out of a stock or flows from a stock to a stock. You use a variable to for constants or to compute the value of equations that relate constants and stocks and flows, and you use links to communicate values from one place to another. Note that a link only communicates a value from one point to another. It doesn't actually result in anything moving from one point to another, whereas a flow actually results in a quantity of something moving from one place to another. So this is an initial introduction to the four pieces that we use to create to create a model, and everything else that we build will be built from those four pieces and a few minor alterations to them. So I hope this came across well, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.